Welcome back, artists. I'm Waiya Paints, and this week I gotta be prepared to dodge some Omega beams, cause we're going to Apocalypse and painting Darkseid. And DC Thanos here has been sculpted wonderfully by this week's sponsor, SuperShark. And when they showed me the files, I was like, yes! And the rest was history. Now, Darkseid comes on a bit of a diorama base, but if we tackle the project in manageable sections and focus on the fundamentals, I know we're gonna make something great. So, grab your favorite sacrifice, cause you might need it, and meet me over at the painting table. I'm gonna grab my brushes. Let's get started. Surprise, surprise. I'm starting with the base. Well, at first I would say this is a standard rocky base. This is actually an Apocalypse rocky base, which makes things even easier on us, as it's going to be a simple grayscale, starting with deep gray. Since I want to preserve the black primer as much as I can, I went with a dry brush. I mainly want this to get around 50% coverage over the general ash area, while I'm aiming more for a 70 to 80% coverage over the rocks. This will let me get a bit of separation by brightness. This bit of contrast is all it takes to help show the different surface types. And just to take it one small step forward, make sure the tops of the large rocks get a touch more than anywhere else. And just like that, our first color is done, and we're off to a great start. Next up, ash gray. For this highlight, I want to try to restrict myself to the top facing surfaces as much as I can. In general, when I do successive dry brush highlights like this, I try to half the intensity of each application. So this time, a controlled and targeted approach is needed. Just try and focus on highlighting one rock at a time, and you should be good. And don't worry if you get a bit of over highlighting. The next step gives us a bit of wiggle room on that. And time to get that wiggle room with Nuln Oil. Here I opted for a bit of a random stipple for the lower rocks. The random variation I can get from a stipple adds to the natural feel while still getting an overall shade, while the large rocks got more of an even application, so I wouldn't muddy the texture I had already developed. Just be ready and able to mop up any overshading. Then put it down for a full dry cycle. We have one more step to go. Once dry, we need to come back with the ash gray as a final highlight. And if you've over highlighted the first time around, try to remember where you slipped up and treat it like a rehearsal. Correct for it on this pass and ease up this edge highlight at a nice slow pace so you can call it before it oversteps. With the rock colors finished up, I slotted in all the various JLA props into their proper spots to get an idea of how it was coming together. So far, so good. The first prop to go will be this Green Lantern battery, which should be simple enough. To get us going, Guardian Green. Really, the only tricky part with this step is how to hold and paint the lantern at the same time. And the answer is very carefully. A set of nimble fingers, a nearby fan, and a touch of planning, and you should be fine. Just make sure you're aiming for 100% coverage. For the first highlight, Jungle Green. Here, I'm going back to the stipple and building up the colors slowly over successive passes. Using a stipple for the highlights is a pretty safe choice, as it gives you tons of time to adjust where you want the most intensity. Unlike normal layer painting, where you really need to nail where you want the most highlighting with the first touch. Now for a touch of shade with green tone. This is an uncomplicated step. Just follow all the main seams you see around the lantern. Thankfully, most can be laid down as easy as holding the brush still and rotating the part. Just try to be as deliberate with the placement as you can. These shadows add drama, so don't be shy about coming back in for a second coat for maximum readability. Finally, to really push the contrast, light livery green. This paint tends to behave more like a UV paint, so you may not notice what it's doing without adding a second coat, but try to reserve yourself to a single highlight pass along each rim and edge you find. It should go rather fast. One prop down, let's keep on trucking. Let's do Aquaman's Trident. It should be really quick. Stepping in, greedy gold. I want to keep this simple, mainly because, let's face it, Aquaman is kinda simple. The guy talks to fish, so it makes sense that he would show up to fight Darkseid with a big metal pokey stick. So with that in mind, I based the sharp bits and the center core with this gold. At the very least, his stabby stick is going to be blinged out. Next, a touch of rough iron. This will take care of the handholds and the weighted baubles towards the head. The only concern here is keeping this even and smooth. While not as reflective, it is still a metallic paint and will need an extra bit of care to get those smooth results. Of course, it needed a bit of light tone for shading. A thin down all over shade will get me a nice patina over the Trident. And with the deep ribbing, you get a lot of wiggle room when it comes to overshading. But just don't get complacent though. Be on the lookout for any errant pooling that should be mopped up. After some drying, it was time for bright gold to shine. Just a light dry brush pass to catch all the edges of the dangerous bits, plus a few touches here and there on the shaft to add a bit more interest. Slotted in and looking good. No need to slow down now. Next up, Clark's cape. So primaries it is. I started with Dragon Red for the base. Now because this is red over black, you should be prepared for this to take a few coats to get full coverage. Just keep it thin and you can stack up as many layers as you need. For me, it took 4. But as you can see, the patience in application paid off with a solid depth of color. Now to add a bit more depth, magenta tone. Personally, I think a thin tint coat like this just adds a little subtle something to all your shadows. This might be one of those me things, but I really dig the look it gives me. Just make sure to keep it even. You don't want any coffee staining on a cape. After some drying, once again we need to come back with a light dry brush of the Dragon Red to brighten up the top surface and a bit creeping down the sides. Just keep it light. The shade we put on in the last step is a very slight step down, and it won't take much to completely cover it up, so keep an eye on it. Now for a legit highlight with pure red. For this one, I'm mixing it up a bit with a semi-stipple stroke. You can think of it as a stamp followed by a slight drag. That drag is going to add a bit of directional grain. It's the sort of look I've begun to really like on fabrics. So long as you control your paint load to what you would have for a light dry brush, you should get some pretty great results pretty easily. One tip I have though is don't be afraid to vary your stroke angle. Just do it gradually and you should be good. Now for the S-bit, masking is in order so we can ensure clean lines. Then, mythical orange is the first step on our way to yellow. You want to paint clean here. This is the foundation of what's to come, so you need to make sure to keep the layers as smooth as possible. Thankfully, this is a bit less painful than painting yellow, and the better job we do here, the easier and quicker the yellow will be down the line. Speaking of that yellow, the one of choice is demonic yellow, and over the orange, it's covering nice and smooth. 2 coats and I was happy. Finally, a thinned down light tone finished off the look. Sliding the cape into the base, it's looking good. 3 down, 3 to go. Next up, a 2-for-1, Batarang and the Bat Belt. First, the Batarang is going to be super easy, starting with black metal. Here, I want to leave most of the flat surface black and have a fairly even ring of this silver encroaching in. It only takes a few swipes or so, but make sure your swipes lift off the part after it passes the edge, or you'll get too much coverage towards the center. Then I switched to gunmetal. Using this, I put some dabs into the larger cracks and then lined the edge of the blade. And before you know it, I had a dangerous looking Batarang. I always dig when elements like this just magically come together with just a few easy steps. Now for the bat belt itself. And I want to keep this super simple as well, not just for me. The bat belt is all utility, and the only design choices here are made for stealth. So keeping this dark is the plan. So after a quick dry brush dusting of gunmetal along the body of the belt, I gave each pouch a basing of ash gray, only slowing down to make sure I don't overspill on the metallics. Then came the clean painting section, as I used black to take care of all the piping on the pouches. Thankfully, these details are pretty accessible and can be done using basic edge highlighting techniques. So if you're trying to nail this with the tip of your brush, you're trying to paint in the least forgiving way. Now for death metal to add a bit of interest, but not too much interest, as I'm only using this on the belt buckle and the buttons. Then everything got a null and oil shade. There wasn't much to see here, just keep it thin and even. And don't forget to mop up all that pooling. Finally, to finish off the belt, a bit of greedy gold to catch some of the glints of the buckle, and a dot for each pouch button. Putting it on the base, it's looking so close to done. Just that shield to go. And as shields go, it's a good one from the classic era. So I'm grabbing rough iron to start us off here. Since the mascara takes its design from ancient Greece, I want this to feel older than the other props, so I'm going for a rich bronze patina. And I don't have any plans to do any extreme aging with verdigris. It would have been well maintained and cared by the Amazons. To highlight, hammered copper. While a shield made of copper wouldn't be that useful, this copper on top of iron reads very much like old bronze. And a bronze shield this thick would weigh around 250 pounds. But I'm pretty sure Wonder Woman could one-hand it like a boss. Just be sure to run the strokes almost parallel to the surface while you're dry brushing here. This will help prevent the bristles from falling into the valleys. That way, you can keep a lot of that rough iron showing for the patina. Then it's time for Chaotic Red. This was to get a solid foundation for the center of the shield. And don't worry about the back. This is going to be leaning right up against the rock, so there's no need to worry about it. We can solely focus on making the front look cherry. And even though this is dark red, it still acts like a typical red and has poor coverage. So you may need to get a second or third coat to get a solid base. Next, I swapped to Dragon Red to start stippling up the center for a bit of an ethereal glow. This may take a few minutes to build up, but if you're patient, you should get a nice subtle ring forming. You don't really need to worry about the dead center for now. Just make sure the ring is on point and clear. Now moving up to pure red. While I'm sticking with a stipple, I'm now much more deliberate with them, thinking about where I want to put each one. This is in order to keep it fairly light and even, as I only want to use a few dozen taps in total, because I think going over that will look overly done. And using fewer taps here makes me value how much each one of these taps changes the look, as this is one of those less is more situations. Next is time for Thin Down Gritty Gold to fill in the center emblem. You'll need to watch your paint load here, as a bit too overloaded will flood the dividing line between the two W's. And while it looks very dull due to how much I thinned it, once I put on the second coat, the insignia was shiny and very readable. All it needed was a touch on each of the rivets and it was done. As soon as I slotted it into the base, I knew we were looking good. Time for a breather. Which means it's a perfect time to take a second and thank all my subscribers over on Patreon. Whether it's a one-time special thing that you can't do every month, or you're one of the stalwarts that's had their name etched into the wall of greatness for months, I truly can't thank you enough. If you would like to join the Painting Pantheon, you'll find a link to my Patreon in the description below. You can even join for free, just to let me know that you're picking up what I'm putting down. I'd also want to take a moment to thank our subscriber this week, SuperShark. They sent me a doozy of a statue. And once again, SuperShark delivered with one dripping with details. You can really tell they're fans of what they're sculpting. If you want to get your hands on this and many other A-grade sculpts, be sure to check out their link in the description as well. Who knows, you may even find your next project. For now, patience isn't one of the abilities of Darkseid. We better get back at it. I went with gunmetal to get us going. Here, I just need to dry brush up all the chainmail sections, trying to maintain the black primer for the shadows behind. This is easy enough to do, so long as you avoid any poking or stippling kind of motion, and just use gentle sweeps across the face. Now I want to handle the recessed accent panels with a bit of Dragon Red. Honestly, this could just as well be gold or silver, as Darkseid has a lot of different outfits to suit his current mood. Like, who could forget his sassy period, when he was all about thigh-high boots, flared gloves, and a vanity cape. Darkseid was living his best life before anybody even knew what that meant. So as the kids would say, slay. Anyway, doing these recessed panels now is procedurally a good idea, because it's much easier to paint them now when any overspill is going to be painted over anyways. And when we paint the raised part of the armor, it's going to be a whole lot easier to keep control of the paint from running down here. Just don't spend tons of time trying to get it perfect. Just block in the red, because we're going to add in more later along with shading. Now for his main armor color, Dark Sky. This ended up threading the needle on being a very dark but slightly desaturated blue, so it's undeniably blue without being a loud and obnoxious hue, which really speaks to the old coldness this character exudes. While Apocalypse is a planet of fire, ash, and brimstone, Darkseid rules it with a cold, calm determination. Now, while applying this, you'll see me switch brushes a lot. This is mostly because I always try to use the biggest brush I feel comfortable using. The bigger the brush, the faster you paint. So in situations where I have high detail areas and large areas, it's more efficient to swap between the two as needed. Just remember to completely wash out your brushes when you swap, or you might come back to a brush full of dried paint. Now for some deep gray, this time for his skin. Again, keeping this paint within the lines is easy peasy. We're just looking for even coverage over the skin so we can move on to shading. Just watch how much paint you're using. Pooling here will be hard to notice due to the deep texture lines. If you can maintain some of the black in those areas, great. If not, it won't be the end of the world. As you can see, I was a bit willy-nilly with my basing and lost most of it. No worries, just keep moving forward. And I almost forgot to do his hands, which reminds me, have you ever noticed how big time villains only ever do two things with their hands when they're posing? It's either Hulk fist or jazz hands. Magneto, Mephisto, Dark Phoenix, once you see it, you can't unsee it. My hope, at least from now on, when you see it, you'll think jazz hands. Now for shading with magenta. A quick once over will do the thinner bits, and don't really concern yourself with a tiny bit of overspill here. So long as it's not excessive, it won't be noticeable over all the shading we're gonna do. Now when it comes to the shoulder panels, we have plenty of room to do some interesting shadows very easily. First by giving them an all over wash, then cleaning and drying our brush so we can soak up as much of the wash in the center as we can. Clean the brush again, this time leaving a bit of clean water on the brush, and gently clean the areas in the center of each panel. Then leave it to dry. Easy peasy. Now we're going to swap over to Nuln Oil to shade the skin. While you want this to gather in all the details, don't overload it to make it happen. This is because arms and legs are cylinders. All you're going to do is end up with a giant puddle on the underside that's going to ruin your work. Instead, use multiple thin coats if you want a darker look. Finally, we need oil stains for the armor, starting with the chainmail. Here, I need an all-over job to help ink out the background of the chain. While this will darken the chains overall, I plan on coming back to make the highlights a bit more interesting. Then I focused on the plate armor. Here, I want a lot more randomness to it, so I went with an overall stipple, while also adding some a bit more purposefully to the major seams that I wanted to separate a little bit more. With the shades done, Mithril was called in to re-highlight the chainmail and do some weathering. On the chainmail, I'm looking to pick out the form I see underneath the armor. So I want the bulging part on the outside of the leg to reflect more light, and the same goes for the ripples on the front and back drapes as well. Try to look for what makes sense for more light to hit it, and then just trust yourself. The more you do it, the better and faster you'll get at it. For the weathering, I swapped over to a very large floof brush as I need a feather-like touch to this. I'm looking to catch each sharp edge, along with adding hundreds of tiny silver hairline scratches along the surface and a slightly metallic sheen. This is how you can make pretty much any flat color read as a slight metallic to the eye. You just need to have a very soft touch, a keen eye watching, and the discipline to stop before it's too much. Again, Like all things, it takes practice, but I love the results I get. And if you're wondering what I was going to do with the cuffs on his armbands, leaving them black for this part lets me silver them up in this step pretty much for free. Working smarter, not harder. Doing the chest is a bit more of the same. Manage your paint load for a very light dry brush, and be ready to pump the brakes or pull the plug when you hit that sweet spot. But also, don't stress over it too much, as this can handle a bit of an over application. It'll look like you just intended a bit more battle damage and the paint has worn thin. Just a happy little accident. But if you do go too far and you don't like the looks of the extra damage, like here on his jaw, it's a pretty easy fix. All you have to do is thin down some of that dark sky almost to a wash. Then after putting a few layers on, I can hardly see my oopsie, so I can have an extra go at it. And as you can see after try number 2, you can still kind of see the mistake under the blue. But now it looks like an old repair made to the armor rather than a painting goof. And since we have his head out, I might as well take care of his face now with deep gray followed by a wash. Then, using the last of my skeletal bone, I based up his teeth, being careful of the lips. Then they got a light tone wash. For me, bad guys in general get funky teeth. Can't really worry about oral hygiene when there's a whole universe out there ready to get conquered. But I did go back in with a tiny detail brush for a few dabs of bone to help separate each tooth. Then each eye got filled with dragon red and a tiny dot of mythical orange for the pupil. He's looking almost ready to fire off an Omega Beam. Now for his last detail, we need to handle the gems on his belt and chest. First, I want to lay down some gunmetal to take care of the socket each gem is sitting in. Then give each of them a quick base of chaotic red. Next, jump up to dragon red to add an even highlight in the center of each gem. Then go to pure red with a quick stipple towards the center. And then finally, I use mythical orange as a final stipple. And I gotta apologize for my camera, it decided to focus on my table for most of this. After that, all that was left was a bit of gloss varnish for the gems, and I called it done. And dang, Darkseid, you're looking mean. Like, bro, you just bodied the JLA. You should be more hype, but you're hella nonplussed. But I get it. Sometimes the thing you've been dreaming about finally happens and it's kinda meh. But what's not meh was how good this came out. It's just dripping with details. And thankfully, the artists over at SuperShark not only want their sculpts to print well, they want them to paint well too. With all the props separate and cuts that make sense without leaving seams in odd places, it's a level of execution that I cannot praise enough. All that plus top-notch high detail textures. Well done, SuperShark. If you want to get your hands on this model, be sure to check out the link below. For now, I need to get work on my next project. So, as usual, thank you for watching, stay creative, and always enjoy the process.